There are mornings when heaven moves so quietly that only the listening heart can hear it. This Saturday is not arriving empty-handed. While you were worrying over closed doors, unseen hands were already preparing a table beyond your imagination. God says the surprise coming to you is not accidental, nor delayed. It has been traveling toward you through every silent battle, every lonely prayer, and every night you almost gave up. What feels ordinary now will suddenly reveal the fingerprints of divine timing, and you will understand why certain storms had to pass before this moment could arrive. You have spent so much time questioning the silence that you almost forgot silence can also be preparation. There were moments when you stood before God with tired eyes and an exhausted spirit, asking why nothing seemed to move while others around you appeared to be advancing with ease. You wondered if heaven had misplaced your name among the millions of prayers rising each day. Yet what you don't see was that your waiting season was never empty. It was crowded with unseen arrangements, hidden protection, and quiet construction taking place behind doors your human eyes were never meant to open too early. God says there are certain blessings that cannot enter a hurried soul. Some promises must arrive only after the heart has learned endurance, humility, and trust. You called it delay, but heaven called it development. You called it abandonment, but heaven called it alignment. Every difficult morning carried a lesson your future self would desperately need. Every disappointment stripped away the false dependencies that once distracted you from divine direction. Even the people who walked away played a role they did not fully understand, because their absence forced you to lean closer to God instead of leaning on temporary comfort. There were nights when you almost gave up on what you had once believed with all your heart. The dreams seemed too distant, the answers too delayed. The signs too unclear. But God says a promise delayed is not a promise denied. Seeds buried beneath the soil are not dead, they are preparing for the right season to rise. The farmer does not stand over the ground every hour demanding visible proof. He trusts the unseen process beneath the surface. In the same way, heaven has been working beneath the surface of your life while you mistook hidden growth for complete stillness. What you are about to understand is that waiting has been shaping your character more than immediate success ever could. Quick victories often create shallow roots, but long waiting produces strength that survives storms. God was not merely trying to bless your hands, He was transforming your spirit. The old version of you would not have been able to carry the weight of the doors that are now beginning to open. The impatient version of you would have mishandled the opportunities that are coming. The fearful version of you would have run from responsibilities, attached to the blessing. So heaven slowed certain things down until your soul became ready to stand where you once begged to stand. God says the reason some prayers were not answered immediately is because the timing of heaven protects what the emotions of man would destroy. You were asking for pieces while God was building the whole picture. You cried over one closed opportunity, not realizing that accepting it would have removed you from the greater path already designed for your future. What looked like rejection was often redirection. What looked like delay was often mercy hidden beneath disappointment. And now you are entering a season where fragments of confusion will begin connecting together. You will look back at painful chapters and suddenly understand why certain relationships had to end, why certain plans collapsed, and why certain doors refused to move no matter how hard you pushed against them. God says the waiting season is about to reveal its purpose in ways so precious. See that even your past sorrow will start making sense. The tears were not wasted. The loneliness was not meaningless. The silence was not empty. Every second carried invisible purpose, and heaven never lost control for a single moment. For a long time, you interpreted closed doors as personal failure. You stood outside opportunities that seemed perfect for your life, knocking with all the strength you had left, only to watch those doors remain unmoved. It wounded your confidence. It made you question your worth, your calling, even your relationship with God. You thought if something was truly meant for you, it would happen quickly and smoothly. But heaven often works through resistance, because not every open path leads to peace, and not every denial is destruction. God says some doors stayed closed because danger was hiding behind what looked attractive. You were looking at the surface while heaven could already see the ending. Certain people smiled in front of you while secretly carrying yin intentions that would have drained your spirit. Certain opportunities appeared successful on the outside, but would have slowly stolen your peace, your focus, and your identity. You begged for entry into places that would have left you emptier than before, yet because you could not see the trap, you mistook divine protection for painful rejection. There are moments when God says, no, not to punish his children, but to preserve them. A parent does not hand a child everything he asks for simply because the child is crying. Love sometimes refuses access. Wisdom sometimes blocks the road. And what felt cruel in one season often becomes mercy when viewed from the distance of time. You may not have understood it when relationships suddenly ended without explanation, when plans collapsed at the last minute, or when people you trusted unexpectedly walked away, but heaven was removing what your emotions still wanted to hold on to. Some of the hardest prayers to accept are the unanswered on. Ease. Human hearts naturally crave immediate clarity. We want explanations while we are hurting, answers while we are waiting, and visible proof while we are struggling. But God rarely reveals the entire picture all at once. If he showed you every hidden danger he prevented, every betrayal he blocked, and every disaster he quietly diverted away from your life, you would realize that many closed doors were actually shields standing between you and unnecessary suffering. God says there were places you could not enter because your destiny was never meant to shrink itself to fit those environments. Some rooms rejected you because your assignment was larger than what those walls could contain. What felt like exclusion was often preparation for something greater. You cried over invitations you never received, while heaven was preparing a table where you would not need to beg for acceptance. The wrong doors demand that you prove your value. The right doors recognize what God already placed inside. There were also seasons when God intentionally kept you still because you were emotionally exhausted without even realizing it. You were carrying hidden wounds, silent fears, and unresolved pain beneath your daily routine. Had certain blessings arrived during that fragile season, you might have destroyed them through anxiety, insecurity, or desperation. So heaven closed certain paths long enough for your soul to heal in private. The delay was not abandonment. It was restoration happening quietly beneath the surface. Now you are beginning to see life differently. The closed doors no longer appear as evidence of your failure, but as signs that God refused to let temporary desires sabotage eternal purpose. What once felt unfair is slowly revealing its wisdom. You are starting to understand that not every opportunity deserves access to your future. Some things must remain closed forever because your calling cannot survive in places built beneath your worth. And as this Saturday approaches, God says you will soon recognize that the very doors you once cried over were the same doors heaven locked to protect the life that is now unfolding before you. And while you were grieving over what did not happen, heaven was quietly preparing what you never expected. God says this Saturday will carry a kind of favor that arrives without warning, touching areas of your life you had almost stopped praying about. There are burdens you learned to live with so long that they started feeling permanent. You adjusted yourself to disappointment. You trained your heart not to expect too much because expectation had become painful. But God is not limited by the hopeless routines you created to protect yourself from further hurt. There are seasons when life slowly convinces people that nothing will ever change. Days begin to repeat themselves with the same worries, the same financial pressure, the same emotional exhaustion, the same unanswered questions. You wake up carrying silent bar, T-less nobody fully understands. You smile in front of others while privately wondering how much longer you can continue carrying the weight pressing against your spirit. Yet God says heaven has not forgotten the details of your struggle. Every tear you hid, every prayer whispered in weakness, every moment you kept going despite wanting to quit has been witnessed completely. The surprise coming into your life will not arrive the way human logic expected. God often moves through sudden shifts because miracles are designed to remind people that divine power operates beyond ordinary limitations. One unexpected conversation can change an entire direction. One opportunity can reverse months of hardship. One moment of favor can open doors that years of striving could not force open. What you considered impossible is not difficult for God. The creator of time is not threatened by delays, setbacks, or human obstacles. God says some blessings are being released specifically because you survive. Seasons that should have broken you. You endured betrayal without becoming bitter. You survived loneliness without completely losing faith. You continued walking even while carrying invisible exhaustion. Heaven sees strength differently than the world does. The world celebrates loud victories and visible success, but God also honors the quiet endurance of those who kept believing while nothing around them seemed to improve. Your perseverance has not been ignored. This coming season will carry evidence that God can restore what life tried to steal. There are relationships that will heal unexpectedly. There are financial doors beginning to shift quietly behind the scenes. There are opportunities moving toward you that your mind has not yet imagined. Even areas where you accepted defeat are now becoming places where heaven intends to reveal restoration. God says, do not measure your future by your current surroundings. Seeds often grow underground long before visible change appears above the surface. You may still feel uncertain because disappointment trained you to expect less from life. Fear taught you to guard your heart against hope. But heaven is now challenging the small expectations built by past pain. God did not create you merely to survive endless cycles of frustration. There are moments appointed by divine timing where everything begins changing faster than you thought possible. What remained frozen for months can suddenly move within days when heaven releases favor over a situation. Saturday carries more than another ordinary sunrise. God says there are unseen arrangements already unfolding. Certain answers are closer than you realize. Certain battles are weakening even now. Certain opportunities are moving toward your life while you remain unaware of them. And when the unexpected favor finally arrives, you will understand that God was working during every silent moment, every delay, and every season where nothing seemed to happen at all. There was nothing. Days you never spoke about because explaining them became too exhausting. Some pain settles so deeply into your spirit that you learn to carry it quietly, smiling through conversations while your heart fought battles nobody could fully see. God says heaven has heard the cries you never expressed aloud. The tears that fell in private were never invisible. The nights when you stared into darkness feeling forgotten were carefully witnessed by the one who understands suffering more deeply than any human ever could. People often assume strength means silence. They praise the person who keeps functioning while falling apart internally. So you trained yourself to hide the heaviness. You answered questions with simple words while carrying storms too complicated to explain. There were moments when even your prayers became quiet because disappointment had exhausted your language. You did not know what to ask for anymore. You only wanted relief from the invisible pressure sitting on your soul. Why after day? God says the pain you concealed from others never escaped heaven's attention. Human beings can overlook suffering when it is not visible, but God sees the hidden fractures beneath outward composure. He notices the trembling faith behind your calm appearance. He sees the courage it took for you to continue waking up each morning despite the emotional exhaustion trying to pull you backward. What others dismissed as ordinary survival was actually spiritual warfare happening quietly within you. There are hurts that change the way you see yourself. Words spoken against you stayed in your mind longer than they should have. Rejection convinced you that you were unwanted. Failure made you question your value. Betrayal damaged your ability to trust. And over time, these wounds slowly shaped the expectations you carried about your future. You stopped believing certain good things could happen for you because pain persuaded you that disappointment was safer than hope. But God say, your suffering was never meant to become your identity. The enemy wanted the wounds to define you permanently. He wanted your heartbreak to silence your purpose. He wanted your disappointments to become chains around your future. Yet heaven specializes in restoring what pain attempted to destroy. God does not merely observe brokenness, he enters it. He walks into the darkest corners of human weakness and begins rebuilding what seemed impossible to repair. There were seasons when you believed nobody truly understood what you carried. Even surrounded by people, you felt emotionally isolated. You wanted comfort but feared vulnerability. You wanted someone to notice your pain without forcing you to explain it. Yet God says some of your deepest healing began in those lonely moments because isolation stripped away distractions and brought your wounded spirit face to face with divine presence. What felt empty was often sacred ground, where heaven was slowly repairing unseen damage within you. A heart. The scars you carry now will one day become proof that survival is possible even after devastating seasons. Not because you were naturally strong, but because God sustained you when your own strength failed. The fact that you are still standing after everything you endured is already evidence that heaven refused to abandon you. You survived moments that should have crushed your spirit completely. And though you still carry questions, though some wounds still ache beneath the surface, God says healing has already begun moving through places inside you that pain once claimed forever. This Saturday will not only bring external surprises, heaven is also preparing internal restoration. Peace is returning to thoughts that have been restless for too long. Light is beginning to enter rooms within your soul that have remained dark through many difficult seasons. God says the hidden pain you buried beneath silence is finally reaching the moment where mercy, healing, and restoration be. Edgin, touching every part of your weary heart, there were people who looked at your life and quietly decided you would never rise beyond your current condition. They measured your future by your struggles, your failures, your delays, and your weakest moments. Some dismissed you because they only saw the chapter where you were broken. Others walked away because they believed nothing valuable could come from the battles surrounding your life. God says many judged you while heaven was still writing your story. What hurt the most was not always the opposition of strangers, but the silence of people you once trusted deeply. There were moments when you needed encouragement and instead received distance. Moments when you hoped for loyalty and instead experienced abandonment. Some people watched you suffer without offering support because they secretly assumed your life would remain stuck where it was. Human beings often celebrate visible success, but very few remain beside someone during end seasons of becoming. God says there are individuals who forgot your worth because they became too focused on your temporary condition. They saw your delay and assumed you had no destiny. They saw your struggles and assumed you carried no favor. They saw your closed doors and believed your story had already reached its ending. But heaven never defines people by the season they are surviving. God sees beyond present weakness into future purpose. While others focused on what you lacked, heaven focused on what you were becoming. There is a painful loneliness that comes when people underestimate you. It creates silent questions within the heart. You begin wondering if perhaps they are right about you. Perhaps you truly are forgotten. Perhaps your dreams really are unrealistic. Perhaps your best days already passed. These thoughts slowly invade the mind when disappointment lasts longer than expected, and over time, constant rejection can make even strong souls doubt their own value. But God says your worth was never determined by human recognition. People are limited by appearances, timing, and personal opinion. Heaven is not. The same God who raises the overlooked, the rejected, and the underestimated is still working within your life now. Scripture repeatedly reveals God choosing individuals the world ignored. Shepherds became kings, prisoners became leaders, ordinary fishermen became voices that changed nations. Heaven delights in revealing greatness through people others failed to notice. What is coming into your life will not merely bless you privately. God says there will be visible evidence of His hand upon you. The people who once overlooked your value will witness doors opening that no human effort could create alone. They will see peace resting upon the same person they expected to collapse. They will watch restoration unfold where they predicted permanent defeat. Not because God desires revenge, but because divine elevation reveals that human judgment is never final. There are some who only respected power, status, or visible success. They could not recognize purpose while it was still hidden beneath struggle. But heaven often conceals greatness inside difficult seasons until the appointed time arrives. God was protecting your growth in private before revealing your elevation publicly. Had certain blessings appeared too early, pride, distraction, or outside pressure might have destroyed what heaven intended to build carefully within you. Now the season is beginning to shift. The same life people quietly pitied will soon carry signs of unexpected favor. The same voice others ignored will begin speaking with authority shaped by suffering and endurance. God says your elevation will not come through arrogance or human striving, but through divine timing that no person can stop. Those who forgot your worth will witness heaven restoring your name, your peace, your confidence, and your future in ways far beyond what they ever imagined possible. For many months, fear has been sitting quietly at the edge of your thoughts, shaping the way you see tomorrow. Even during peaceful moments, there has been a hidden tension inside you, as though your heart has been preparing itself for disappointment before disappointment even arrives. God says the weight you have been carrying was never meant to become permanent. The anxiety, the uncertainty, the emotional exhaustion, and the constant overthinking were not created to rule your spirit forever. You became so familiar with worry that it slowly started feeling normal. Every new opportunity carried suspicion. Every delay increased your doubts. Every unanswered prayer tempted you to expect the worst. Fear has a way of shrinking the human spirit little by little until people stop dreaming, stop hoping, and stop believing change is possible. It convinces the heart to settle for survival instead of expecting restoration. And after enough painful experiences, even faith can begin speaking, with a trembling voice. God says the enemy wanted fear to become your permanent atmosphere. He wanted your mind trapped inside endless cycles of uncertainty. He wanted you exhausted before blessings even arrived. Because a fearful soul struggles to recognize open doors when they appear. Fear magnifies obstacles until they seem larger than God's promises. It turns temporary setbacks into permanent conclusions. It whispers that nothing will ever improve, even while heaven is already arranging the breakthrough. There were moments when you smiled outwardly, while inwardly battling storms nobody else could hear. Thoughts kept racing through your mind late at night. Questions repeated themselves endlessly. What if nothing changes? What if things get worse? What if the waiting never ends? Fear feeds upon unanswered questions, and when human understanding cannot see clear solutions, anxiety often begins building dark imaginations about the future. But God says the shift coming into your life will break the authority fear has held over your thoughts. Not all at once through noise or dramatic display, but through undeniable evidence that heaven is still in control. Certain burdens will suddenly become lighter. Certain situations will begin moving in ways you did not expect. Doors you thought were permanently closed will show signs of movement. And little by little, your spirit will remember what peace feels like again. The coming shift is not merely external. God is also restoring your inner confidence. Fear stole your expectation. It convinced you that disappointment was safer than hope. It taught you to lower your dreams so future pain would hurt less. Yet heaven did not create you to live emotionally imprisoned by yesterday's wounds. God says your future cannot fully open while fear continues ruling your imagination. So before certain blessings arrive completely, heaven is first breaking the chains that kept your mind trapped in survival mode. There are battles happening. Now that you cannot yet see, certain obstacles are already weakening behind the scenes. Certain chains are already beginning to crack. Heaven has not remained passive while you suffered. Even during the seasons where nothing appeared to change outwardly, spiritual movement was still taking place quietly beyond your understanding. God has been preparing both the blessing and the person who will receive it. You will soon notice moments where peace enters unexpectedly. Situations that once terrified you will no longer control your emotions the same way. Your confidence will begin returning, not because life suddenly becomes perfect, but because you will finally recognize that God carried you through every previous storm already. The same hand that protected you before is still guiding your future now. This Saturday carries more than temporary encouragement. God says it marks the beginning of a sudden shift that will loosen fear's grip over your life. The heaviness that followed you from, or months will not remain forever. Doubt will lose its authority. Anxiety will no longer dominate every thought, and the heart that became tired from constant worry will slowly begin breathing with peace, faith, and expectation once again. And after everything you have survived, God says the greatest surprise is that what is coming into your life is still larger than what you have been praying for. Human beings naturally pray according to the limits of their imagination. We ask for enough strength to survive another day, enough provision to escape the current struggle, enough peace to quiet the anxiety inside us. But heaven does not think in fragments. God sees the entire landscape of your future at once, including blessings your mind has not yet learned how to expect. There were prayers you whispered through tears, asking only for small signs that God still remembered you. At times your faith became so weary that you stopped asking boldly. You reduced your expectations because disappointment had taught you to fear hope. You prayed cautiously, almost apologetically, trying to protect your heart from another painful delay. Yet God says His plans were never reduced by your moments of weakness. Divine purpose continued moving forward even while your confidence struggled to survive. The beautiful mystery of heaven is that God often prepares answers greater than the request itself. Solomon asked for wisdom and received influence beyond measure. A shepherd boy simply obeyed God and became a king remembered for generations. Fishermen casting ordinary nets became voices that transformed the world. Again and again, Scripture reveals a God who exceeds human expectation, not because people earned it perfectly, but because divine grace operates beyond human limitation. You have been focusing on immediate survival while heaven has been preparing lasting transformation. God says some of the blessings approaching your life will affect more than just the present moment. Certain doors opening now are connected to future opportunities you cannot yet imagine. Certain relationships forming now carry purpose far beyond temporary comfort. Even the struggles you endured are becoming part of a testimony that will strengthen other wounded people one day. There is also a reason God allowed your season of waiting to last longer than you desired. Smaller blessings might have satisfied you temporarily, but heaven intended to build something deeper, stronger, and more complete. Had your early prayers been answered exactly the way you wanted, you may never have grown into the person capable of carrying what is now being prepared for you. Delay stretched your faith, refined your character, and removed dependencies that would have limited your future growth. God says the surprise coming this Saturday is not simply about material improvement or temporary excitement. It is about revelation. You are about to discover that heaven remained active during every silent season. The pieces that once appeared disconnected will suddenly begin making sense. You will recognize that closed doors, painful endings, lonely nights, and unexpected delays were all shaping a path far greater than the one you originally planned for yourself. There are blessings approaching your life that cannot be explained merely by human effort. Peace returning after years of inner turmoil. Opportunities appearing where no logical path existed. Strength rising within you after seasons of emotional exhaustion. Restoration entering places you assumed would remain permanently broken. God says when these things begin unfolding, you must not reduce them to coincidence. They are evidence that heaven never stopped working behind the curtain of your ordinary days. And one day you will look back at this season with different eyes. The tears, the waiting, the confusion, the battles, and the silence will no longer appear meaningless. You will realize God was carrying you towards something your limited vision could not yet understand. The prayers you thought were too impossible, too delayed, or too forgotten were still resting safely within divine timing. Because the truth heaven wants you to understand now is this: what God prepared for you was never meant to barely meet your expectations. It was designed to surpass them completely.